All right, today we're tackling a big one, the sprawling, disturbing scandal of Jeffrey Epstein. This is a story about incredible wealth, connections to the most powerful people on the planet, and absolutely horrific crimes that were somehow hidden in plain sight for decades. It's also a story about a justice system that, for a very long time, just failed. So let's get right into it. So to understand this, you have to start here, in the Caribbean. Picture this. It's 1998, and a wealthy financier named Jeffrey Epstein buys his own private island, Little St. James. And I mean, it was pure paradise. Stunning beaches, a mansion that looks like a palace, luxury villas for guests, pools, a helipad, the whole 9 yards. A perfect hideaway for a billionaire. But beneath all that beauty was a secret. A secret so dark and so well known that the people living on nearby islands, well, they had their own name for it. They called it Pedophile Island because this so-called paradise was actually the epicenter of a horrifying sex trafficking operation where girls as young as 12 were abused. So you have to be asking, how on earth does something like this happen? How does a former math teacher build an entire island fortress of abuse? Well, it started with money, of course. Epstein became a financial advisor to billionaires and got incredibly rich. But the money wasn't the most important part, not by a long shot. It was his network. It was who he knew. And when I say powerful connections, I mean the list is just staggering. We're talking about former U.S. presidents, Bill Clinton, Donald Trump. We're talking about British royalty, like Prince Andrew, even world-renowned scientists like Stephen Hawking, and the former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Barak. These were the kinds of people flying on his private jet, visiting his homes, and that gave him this aura of being completely untouchable. But maybe the most sickening part of all of this was how organized it was. This was not random. Investigators literally called it a pyramid scheme of abuse. Epstein would abuse a girl, then pay her to go out and recruit her friends, who would then be pressured to recruit their friends. It was a diabolical system that created a constant, horrifying supply chain of vulnerable underage girls. For years, all of this was happening in the shadows. But then, in 2005, one 14-year-old girl in Florida filed a police complaint, and that finally started to crack the case open. The police started pulling the thread, and one victim led to another, and another. Pretty soon, they'd uncovered a chain of at least 36 victims. The FBI got involved. The case seemed absolutely ironclad. It looked like he was finally going down. But then came the deal. And what happened next is just a total mockery of justice. On one side, you've got the FBI's case, international sex trafficking, dozens of minor victims, a potential life sentence. And on the other side, a secret, backroom deal brokered by a federal attorney named Alexander Acosta. Epstein pleads guilty to a couple of minor charges, and in return, he and all of his accomplices get full immunity from any federal charges. And the most crucial part, the victims were never even told this deal was being made. So what was the sentence? A measly 18 months, and even that was a complete sham. He got to serve his time in a private wing of a local jail. And get this, he had work release. He could leave the jail for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, to go to his office. He was basically just sleeping at the jail. He got out in July 2009 after serving just over a year. And for almost a decade, that was it. It looked like the story was over. The bad guy had completely gotten away with it. But one person just refused to let the story die, an investigative journalist for the Miami Herald named Julie K. Brown. And her crusade is just remarkable. This wasn't a quick story. She spent years digging into this cold case, tracking down and talking to victims who had been ignored, eventually identifying over 80 of them. Then, in 2018, the Miami Herald published her explosive series, Perversion of Justice. It set off a firestorm. The public outrage was so intense, it forced federal prosecutors in New York to reopen the case. And because of her work, in July 2019, Epstein was arrested again. This time, it felt different. It felt like justice was actually coming. The victims were finally going to get their day in court. But in a story that's already full of unbelievable twists, the biggest one was yet to come. On August 10, 2019, while he was in a federal jail waiting for his trial, Jeffrey Epstein was found dead. The official cause of death was ruled a suicide. And just like that, he was gone. He would never face his accusers, and it seemed like all of his secrets and the secrets of his powerful friends might have died right there with him. But a lot of people were not buying it.
The timing, the circumstances, it all felt way too convenient. And that's where the phrase, Epstein didn't kill himself, came from. It went viral almost instantly. It became this cultural shorthand for the widespread belief that he was silenced to protect all the powerful people in his network. Our source material notes that this was initially pushed by Trump supporters who were trying to point the finger at Bill Clinton.
Okay, so this brings us to the political fallout and the now infamous Epstein Files. And I want to be really clear here. We're about to move into a speculative narrative laid out in our source material. This is a hypothetical chain of events that centers around the 2024 election and what happened after.
So in this speculative account, Donald Trump is on the campaign trail and makes a huge promise. If you elect him, he will declassify and release every single one of the Epstein files. He wins the election, but then, after he's in office, his administration does a complete 180. The Justice Department says there's no such thing as a client list, and Trump himself starts calling the whole thing a boring Democrat hoax. So the huge question becomes, what changed? Well, as you can imagine, a U-turn that dramatic just poured gasoline on the fire of suspicion. The public pressure builds and builds until, finally, in a pretty rare move, Congress passes a bipartisan bill forcing the administration's Justice Department to release at least a portion of the files in December of 2025.
And according to this telling of events, what came out, even with huge chunks of it blacked out, was absolutely explosive. The source's account of these files describes documents suggesting Trump flew on Epstein's plane multiple times. It alleges there was an email from Epstein himself claiming Trump knew about the girls. It points to an FBI tip from a limo driver who allegedly overheard Trump discussing the abuse of a girl. And then there's this chilling letter, supposedly from Epstein, that makes a direct comparison between himself and our president.
So now you have a massive credibility gap. On one side, you have Trump's public statements. I wasn't a fan, that he distanced himself, that he never flew on the plane. But on the other side, these alleged documents paint a totally different picture. A 20-year friendship, phone calls 3 times a week, multiple trips on the jet. The two stories just don't line up.
But here's the really staggering part. Even after all of that, the full story is nowhere near being told. Because according to the source, there are more than 1 million documents connected to the Epstein case that are still being kept secret, hidden from the public. And that leaves us with the final haunting question that hangs over this entire saga. With so much information still under lock and key, and who knows how many powerful names hidden behind all that black ink, what else is buried in those files? The full, unredacted truth about Jeffrey Epstein and everyone he was connected to is, for now, still a secret.